So I had quite a bit of fun filming the C55 driving review video before I sold the car. So one thing I've been meaning to do with my C5 Corvette is do the same thing. Now, the car has been very similar to when I got it. I've only done a few minor things to get it to drive, and now I have the new wheels and tires on it. And before I really start diving into the build and repairing it and doing a bunch of modifications, because the big one that's coming up is coilovers, I wanted to do kind of an initial driving impressions and review video of how this car kind of handles and feels being a stock C5 Corvette and being a car that is 20 years old. So just kind of giving you guys a feel for how the car drives initially, so we kind of have a baseline, and then as I mod the car, I can kind of explain how those modifications have helped to improve the driving feel and performance of the car. So let's go ahead and take it out for a spin. Alright, so my goal is to do this in one take, but we'll see how this goes. So my last video on the C55 driving review, I made that quite extensive just because I knew that was going to be my last video on the car. So I definitely don't plan on having this video be 45 minutes long. So I just kind of want to quickly go through some of the main points on this initial driving impressions and review. So the first thing we'll talk about, kind of like I talked about before, is the power and torque feel. Now this car has, I think, 350 or 360 crank horsepower stock. I don't know the torque figure number. It's probably somewhere around there as well. But this car being a lot lighter than the C55, and that's going to be the car I'm going to compare it to because that was my obviously most recent performance car that I owned before this. This car feels very quick, you know, especially for accelerating from a stop. It definitely feels quick. I wouldn't say necessarily the car is like super fast. I mean, only 350 horsepower, that's not a ton in today's day and age of sports cars and whatnot, but the car feels very quick and it feels very lively because I think the curb weight, I'll put it on the screen, I think the curb weight's only like 33 or 3,400 pounds if I'm not mistaken for the C5 Coupe. So the car feels very lively, very quick and fun. So that's really nice. You know, the acceleration feel from a stop is really nice as well. And it's a fun car to drive power wise. I'm sure as I drive the car more, I'll get used to the power and torque a little bit. So that's probably when I'll add a cam, you know, and do like a tune. Well, you got to do those at the same time, really. So that's probably when I'll start doing power mods. The first kind of my plan of attack is to do suspension and handling mods first, get the car nice and feel solid, because my favorite type of driving is like kind of back canyon driving and twisty fun roads like that. I'm not really like a drag, you know, straight line speed type of person, and eventually, like I've been saying, I want to turn this thing into an autocross car, so suspension and handling is huge. So anyway, so power and torque feel is moderate. It's not like crazy amount of power, but it's very fun. So the next thing I want to talk about is the transmission. So this is the 6-speed Tremec, I'm pretty sure. I can't remember the exact number on the transmission. T56, pretty sure. So the 6-speed is awesome. This is my first manual car, so I'm having a lot of fun rowing through gears and stuff. It's such an exhilarating experience, and I'm really glad I chose a manual sports car now, because who knows what the sports cars are going to look like in the future. You know, a lot of cars are going electric, a lot of cars are going dual clutch with the paddles, so I think this is a really cool opportunity to own a manual transmission car. Now with the kind of the gear ratios, I haven't driven another manual car I mean, aside from driving my buddy's Datsun briefly, I haven't driven a ton of manual cars, so comparing like gear ratios and when you're shifting based on what speed you're going, I don't have a lot to compare to, but for the most part, for my initial kind of driving of this car, especially after getting the new wheels and tires on it and being able to drive it in a more spirited manner, it feels very fun. You're never staying in one gear too long. You kind of row through first and second pretty quickly, and so it gives you a good shifting feel overall. It's not boring, because I think one car that people talk about is like the Porsche Cayman GT4 and I think the Shelby GT350. Both have very long first and second gears, so I don't think you're shifting a whole lot with that car, like at lower speeds. So I'm happy that this car is very fun to shift in and out of the lower gears, because that's more applicable on like kind of lower speed back roads. And then the last thing with the transmission is the shifter, really. Now, this is a known thing on the C5 Corvettes. The shifter is just absolutely garbage, and I'd say my next mod after coilovers is going to be an MGW short throw shifter, because I heard those completely change the shifting feel of the car. Because currently the stock shifter is very long throws, so it kind of gives the car an odd feel if you're trying to drive it fast. And I don't know if just because this is the car is 20 years old, it only has 55,000 miles on it, but the shifts are very notchy, and I think definitely this car could use a shifter alignment from what I've heard and read, which basically means, since the transmission in this car is actually in the back, the linkages are pretty long. So over time, there gets a little bit of slop in the linkages, so you don't always slot into the gear all the way. So sometimes it doesn't give you a very nice feel. So I'm not going to try and just do a shifter alignment. I'm just going to wait to get the MGW short throw, and hopefully that will make the shifting feel a lot better, especially because my shift knob here isn't even like threaded on. It's just like sitting on top of the shifter because the threads are all screwed up. So it likes to spin around. So that's not the most fun feeling. So the next thing I want to talk about is the suspension feel. Now, I kind of hinted at this in my last video where I unveiled the wheel and tire setup on the car. The suspension feel in this car, you can definitely tell it's a 20-year-old car. It feels very dated. For those that don't know, this car actually has a transverse composite leaf spring setup. So instead of a typical coil over shock setup like a lot of cars, this car has just two shocks on either end, and then there's a leaf spring, like if you think of a truck leaf spring, but instead of going longitudinally with the car, it goes transverse across the car this way. And it's made out of I believe some composite, like a fiberglass composite mixture of some kind. And the suspension just feels very soft. Like, as you can especially tell, like when you go over speed bumps, the car feels more like a Cadillac, and kind of like a boat. It's kind of just like humbling over it than being more stiff. And some people like softer rides, but this is a performance car, so I want it to be a lot more of a precise feeling suspension rather than kind of loose and soft. And this car actually does have the F45 adjustable suspension option, so you can change the damping from tour to sport to performance. Now, I basically kept the dial in the performance setting mode, and I've tried changing it to the touring and sport mode, and I don't know if it's just because these shocks are really old and whatnot, but I really can't tell the difference. And if there is a difference, it's so subtle, I don't notice it, but maybe someone who owned the car new when the shocks were nice and new, they might notice it a little bit better, because that's definitely one thing with these shocks or with any shock really, but especially these, is they'll just go bad over time, and you need to replace them. And so you can kind of tell they need to be replaced too, because the car is a little bit bouncy. The dampening of the shocks is not as great as probably when they were new. So that's definitely something to talk about. So that's kind of why my next my big mod that I'm saving up for are coilovers. I'm looking at the Alden American coilovers. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to change next, and really up the suspension feel of the car. So the next thing we'll talk about is the steering. Now, the steering, it seems pretty normal to me. Nothing crazy. The Mercedes, the C55 I had very heavy steering because it was a relatively large motor over the front of the axle, or the front axle. So it had a very heavy steering feel. This car being a lighter car, all fiberglass body panels, it feels a little bit lighter, but really nothing to complain about. The steering is kind of like, it's not like something to rave about, but it's not something to complain about. But definitely a mod that I'll be doing in the future here is a new steering wheel, because another common complaint with the C5s is the steering wheel is really large relative for the type of car it is. I don't know the exact diameter, but changing it up to like a I don't know, a NRG or Sparco steering wheel with a smaller diameter, it changes the ratio of how many turns and how the steering feel is. So that's definitely right along next to the short throw shifter. That's one of the next mods that I'm hoping to do relatively soon. So the next thing I'll talk about is the sound. And I mean, good old 5.7 liter LS1 pushrod V8. So you can't go wrong with the sound by any means of the imagination. But you can definitely, it's very interesting. So with the C55, it's obviously a German luxury car, performance car. It's I think a luxury car before a performance car. Some would argue otherwise. I don't know, I think it's a good mixture of both. So that car was pretty refined. So you couldn't necessarily always hear like all the little creaks and rattles. It was a very refined sounding car. You could hear more of the exhaust. Granted, I had a modified exhaust setup on that car for quite some time. With this car being a stock exhaust, I definitely want it to be a little bit louder. But with it being stock, you know, you don't get as much exhaust sound. You get more engine sound more than anything. So with this car, the valve train is definitely louder and kind of more clacky. And that's just because of the nature of it being a small block Chevy pushrod V8. But you definitely get more kind of like engine induction sound with the setup right now. I'm sure as I add a little bit of a louder exhaust, I get more exhaust sound over the engine sound. But it's a very cool sound. You know, you get a nice, like, kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like a whooshing sound, not like a turbo or anything or a supercharger, but you get more of that induction sound over exhaust sound with the stock setup, I would say. And you hear a lot more road noise because the car is, you know, it's definitely a sports car. It's fiberglass, so it's not as padded per se, you know, and it's a lighter car as well. So the sound is good, but definitely something to be improved upon. Definitely would like to do, because I live in California, got to do short tube headers to stay smog legal, and some type of catback exhaust, depending on the pricing and everything, looking at like the Corsa Extreme or a Billy Boat exhaust. So those are the two options I'm looking at. So I'm trying to think, what else? Driving feel. Clutch feel, like I said, I haven't driven a ton of manual transmission cars, so I don't really have much to compare to, but the clutch engagement is pretty nice. I think it's average. It's not very grabby. It's pretty forgiving, especially when starting up a hill. I don't really know. I mean, I can't imagine the clutch is super heavy because it's a stock car, but I mean, you know, after sitting in traffic for a while, my quad will definitely get a little bit tired as I'm clutching in and out. But yeah, so I'm trying to think, anything else with the driving feel of this car. The driving position is really fun. I mean, you're obviously sitting super low to the ground because it's a Corvette, so you get you kind of have a more, and you're sitting back in the seat a little bit more, so it definitely has more of a performance driving position than like the Mercedes did, because that was a sedan after all. So that's really cool. I guess that kind of leads me to talk about the seats, and this is another common complaint with this car, is the seats are just absolutely garbage, especially because this car is 20 years old. The side bolstering, especially on the driver's seat, is just absolutely shot. I don't know if the person who owned it before me or the persons who owned it before me either were really, you know, they didn't have a lot of flexibility, so they just kind of plopped onto the side bolstering and just flattened that out, or they were very overweight and just very large for the seat. One of those two things. So definitely going to be adding probably a set of Corbeau, like FX1 seats, to give a better hugging feel to the, you know, driving position, because you can definitely, you know, you slide around a little bit. But let's just open it up real quick. it's a good sound. Like you get that induction sound, not as much exhaust sound, but it's a unique sound that I'm not used to. So it's definitely invigorating for sure. But yeah, so going back to the seats, definitely going to be changing the seats out at some point. And then I guess really the only thing left to talk about is, I mean, the brakes. The brakes are adequate. You know, I haven't done enough performance driving to really put these stock brakes to the test. I'm sure they can handle the current setup with the car, but it's not until you start adding more power where you're going to really push the limit of these brakes. And I don't really anticipate on doing a ton of track days where you'll be heating up the brakes a lot and possibly cooking them. So really autocross and back road canyon driving. But I still want to upgrade the brakes to a C6 Z06 rotors and calipers, because that's a pretty common mod to give a nice braking feel. And it's pretty relative to like aftermarket brake companies like Brembo and Bear and Wheelwood. Getting a set of like OEM C6 Z06 brakes off of like a used car or off eBay or something is pretty inexpensive, because brakes are very expensive, especially when you're going for like a big brake kit with bigger calipers and rotors and whatnot. So that'll be fun to add on. That'll probably be a little bit down the line because they're still relatively expensive. I think all in you're looking about $2,000 for everything for that. But yeah, I mean, this car is great. I love the driving position. It's really cool having this heads-up display, because you can get some of your readout information, and you know, it's knock on wood, but it's still working great after 20 years. It's very bright. You know, I can see it during the day. But overall, this car is really fun, and I'm just, it's very cool to me, and it makes me feel good knowing that I bought this car at a insurance auction. I did very minimal things and put new wheels and tires on it. Oh, that's another thing I'll talk about real quick. It's just the tires I put on. I put new wheels and tires on it. Haven't done hardly anything to the car, and it's a really well-behaved, nice driving car for being a 20-year-old Corvette. And part of that is because it only has 56,000 miles on it. But it's cool to see that a car this old still, you know, is this fun to drive and whatnot. So I guess the last thing I'll touch on before I wrap up this video is the tires that I put on the car. Now, I put on these Falken, was it FK 510s, along with the TSW Nurburgrings, the wheels that I have. And so I have 18s in the front, 19s in the back. I think it's 275s in the front and 295s or 305s in the back. I can't remember exactly. But now that I have new tires, the car just sticks. Even with the suspension being old and kind of worn down, the car does not lose grip around a corner or starting hard acceleration from a stop. So the tires definitely do an amazing job. And one thing I've said in my past video is tires are definitely an overlooked modification. I think they're one of the best handling and performance mods that you can get, because you need tires anyways to be able to drive, so might as well get some good ones. Eventually, you know, it'll be nice, you know, if I save up more to get some Michelin's Pilot 4S's or something like that, but these are great tires for the time being, and having them a little bit wider than stock definitely gives a little bit more grip and whatnot. This video is about 18 minutes long ish, so I think I'm gonna end it here. Basically covered all the points I wanted to talk about to give this kind of initial driving feel and impression of the car. Do one little quick acceleration. Oh yeah, that feels good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. A lot more Corvette content to come as I start modding it and adding cool things. If you didn't catch my earlier video, basically my plan for this car is to be like a light road racer car, autocross car, and you know, incorporate a lot of 3D printed parts in the car as well, because I do a ton with 3D printing at work, and it's one of my other big hobbies as well. So I hope you guys are excited for that. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. That kind of helps the performance of the video a lot. So I thank you all so much for watching, tuning into this video. If you stuck all the way to the end, especially big thanks to you. It's the day before Thanksgiving, so have a happy Thanksgiving, but by the time this video is out, it'll probably be after Thanksgiving, so have a Merry Christmas or whatever holiday you might celebrate, and I will see you guys in the next one.